Hi, welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright and artistic director of new works at the Lucille Lortel Theater. The Alcove is the new play development program here. And the Lucille Lortel Theater, if you're not aware, is in New York City. I should make no assumptions that you know things. Out there in the audience, if this is the first time you're visiting this series, welcome. If you're a follower, welcome back. As always, I'm going to start with a brief audio description before I introduce our guest today. So I am a fair-skinned person with, today my hair does many things. So today my hair is brownish auburn, it looks like, yes, brownish auburn. I have it pulled up, but it's very wild. My ponytail is making it's in all sorts of directions. It does not want to be tamed today. My bangs are on my forehead. I have brown eyes. I have glasses that are round and big. They're tortoise shell and they're perched on the edge of my nose. I have red lipstick on, and I'm wearing a very colorful shirt full of flowers. Of all sorts of sort of small flowers of yellow and pink and blue. But I'm also wearing on top of the shirt like a very light black knit top. And then behind me is a white background, but it's real. It's not virtual. You'll see the outline of a lamp in a corner. And then you might see occasionally a very whimsical poster that I have hanging on my wall, which is of Dora the Explorer, who I have on my wall to give me energy when I'm writing, to be honest. I'm like, Dora the Explorer can do it, so can I. Our guest today is Allyson Dwyer. Allyson is a theater artist from New Jersey who creates work about the internet, communication, alienation, systems, and time, among other things. We'll talk about all that stuff, and whose work has been seen at the BRIC, the Exponential Festival, Club Thumb, Ensemble Studio Theater, Workshop Theater, Road Theater, so many places. We can talk about all the places, but I want to go on and on and on because more importantly, Allyson is here. Welcome, Allyson.
Hi, hey.
Hello. As you know, for those of you that follow the series, or if you don't, I always start with the same question, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to approach that. I don't know how aware people are that you kind of send a bit of these in advance, so I had to think about it a bit, and I realized it affects it a lot. I am a theater artist who I was born in New Jersey and I still live here, and I'm right outside New York City. So I was thinking the number one thing is probably that I rely on public transportation a lot just to access theater, not just to see it, but to be involved in the theater community of New York. I take the train, I take the bus, I take the ferry, and then sometimes I drive if needed, which I over the years has changed, especially with there's that I forget the name of it. It's like the congestion toll. And then yeah, I'm very interested in things like accessibility. Also being in New Jersey, we've had like things like Hurricane Sandy, and we've had a couple blackouts over the last 2 years, which has made me panic a bit because it's made me realize how intensely I rely on electricity. But if I want to think more macro about it, electricity is something we depend on for a lot of things, which includes access to information. So, and then also I like to write outside, so I feel like that impacts my practice quite a bit. So all these things kind of blend together to impact it.
Well, is there something around, I mean, obviously the climate crisis isn't new. It's just been accelerating in the last 50 years. And I wonder if there's something about when you say, hey, I'm going to make a new piece of theater. Where does it factor? Do you go like, I'm making a new piece of theater because in a climate crisis that we're in, therefore I make these certain aesthetic or practical decisions about what I make? Or do you kind of go, no, I'm going to pretend I'm not in a climate crisis? Do you know what I mean? I wonder how you approach the page or the making of something.
Yeah, so I have I've been self-producing a lot over the last year, and I have a creative partner in a friend of mine, Hannah Birch Carl. She's a sound designer, but she also does props and costumes. And over the last two plays we've worked on together, we've done a lot of creative recycling. We had a piece where, I needed a computer chair. I got it off the street. We like to reuse trash a lot. I think I am very stressed out when I self-produce about all the waste it makes, and I try really hard to use things I already have, or if I'm writing and I know I'm gonna self-produce, I'm like, what do I have that I'm already gonna use? Because I don't want to buy more things.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, that makes sense actually. And I think we are an industry that has a lot of waste attached to it. Every time a show strikes, people don't know what that term means. It's the set gets struck if there's a set of some kind, all the equipment, etc. And so and sometimes it's just thrown away.
Yeah.
Which is why are we doing this? I don't know. It's very strange. So anything to kind of like recycle, but also it affects how people think about touring, and that's a very heavy carbon footprint to touring. Moving planes and buses and trains and and people and equipment and like all of that. I just think about that constantly. About there are things that we can do, and there are companies. I'm going to shout out a company named Julie's Bicycle. Julie's Bicycle is an amazing company that is devoted to strategizing with theater companies around the world to think and act upon, not just think about it, but act upon making their process and projects and touring capabilities completely sustainable ecologically. So shout out to them. I think we need more Julie
Yeah.
bicycles in the world. I wanted to talk about obviously your work focuses a lot on systems and time and communication and et cetera, and the internet. And I wanted to kind of think about like how you approach making work, because I know you do this. So I'm not telling tales out of school. Work that is digital, audio, or podcast driven, or basically exists in different platforms and different ways of communicating with an audience. And so when did that start for you? And also, has that always been the case? And number three part of the question is, what excites you about all those different platforms?
Oh yeah, so it definitely wasn't always the case, but I think once it was, it just opened up like a whole other realm of possibility, which just completely excited me. I think I owe a lot of my inspiration towards audio and digital towards the Brick Theater, especially, during COVID, Teresa Bucheister and Lauren Miller did Out of an Abundance of Caution, which was about a year of digital work where they would present new stuff. And then the Exponential Festival, rather than go dark, they would just have these completely digital seasons, and I just felt so excited that I didn't have to leave my home and I could just turn on the computer, and there was some very weird stuff going on, because I don't know if this is pretentious, but I'm very bored by a lot of things that are on TV. I don't know. I pay for things like Netflix, and I probably watch it like once a year. It's I just don't I there's nothing interesting, and I feel like if I lived in New York, I would be sitting in front of a weird play every night if I could, but it's just not feasible. And so uh I I was so excited by these digital shows that were just so funky and interesting. It felt like I was watching a new form of art appearing before my eyes. And the other thing was that the Brick started this audio lab, which I was very grateful to be a part of. They actually conceived of it before COVID struck, but once it was, we were online, we met on Zoom, and I wrote an audio play. At first, I thought it was going to be a series, but once I started thinking about theatricality mixed with the audio form, it turned into a play that is called Arrow of Time. And what happened was I sent it to Expo, and they said YouTube is the venue. And a lot of times when things are on YouTube, people like to look at things. So at first I thought of like a static image that people could listen to the play. Uh, and then my partner that I'm married to, he and we ended up making a movie. It was very bizarre. I had no idea it was gonna be a movie, but, we ended up, because the play, I guess, like, the concept behind it is that each play is a year in a life of the main character. I was interested in this audio, um, depiction of the movement of time, and, so it starts with the main character at 0, it goes to 60, and, it takes place in, like, a near future New Jersey, deals a bit with climate change in different ways, but kind of very subtly. I'm very interested in depicting dystopias that aren't dystopian, but more like a slow decline. Like a slow boiling pot where you're not even aware. But anyway, each scene ended up being we would kind of manipulate found footage from our iPhones or home movies. It was all things we had. And so it's like an hour and a half long. It even got into the New York City Indie Theater Film Festival, had this really cool showing last year, and it was in that. So it was interesting to consider it a movie, but at the same time, it was like a digital film and also an audio play. So that was like the first digital thing I did, and it was really awesome. And it really opened up a whole pathway. And I think because I had made this thing, I and I guess I don't really have people saying, "Oh, Al, this is what it is." So I was like, I don't I guess this is a new project, so I called it Mind Dream Theater, and now as it's evolving, I want it to be a place that kind of expands our concept of theater. I I kinda see it as like a theater of the mind, and so I'm interested in expanding that. It's not just like a theater of my own work. So I'm starting to grow that theater more. We just did a release of Jared Jordal's, it's called Monologues for Nobody. It's an audio play that's on YouTube, and he did his own visual representation of the play. I think what I'm interested in is playwrights having a way of creating their own work digitally with more ownership over it. And I'm very interested in it because, as you're aware, in New York City, real estate is expensive. And I think a lot of theaters rely on making things that are broadly accepted. So experimental work that I find exciting is often not exciting to big audiences, so theaters don't take risks on them. So I'm interested in the digital realm as a new kind of frontier for artists to take these risks without worry about, oh, this costs a lot. This theater's spending all this money and no one's going to come and we're not going to make ticket sales. Not that I'm saying people won't go, but that uh, I think writing should have space for risks. And yeah, and I apologize for such a long response.
Oh, it's totally fine, and it covers so many areas. I mean, I think that one of the things that it makes me think about is, of course, obviously there's so much gatekeeping in our industry. It happens, in the arts, and often, of course, it's predicated on money, right? Like how much it costs. I mean, the first question that comes at the table is how much will this cost, right? Or is it coming with money attached, or like all these things. And so, and it feels like, this question of risk, which I think is necessary for our art form to evolve, sometimes gets how shall I put it, kind of sidelined, sidelined in favor of like, well, it's gonna, where there'll be a return on it, and it's like maybe there won't be, but maybe the return will be that there will be an audience that will find it and be inspired by it, and who knows, maybe their eyes will be open to a different kind of work and a different kind of making, and I think that's incredibly valuable, especially at a time geopolitically that is so narrow, that is very rigid, that it's enforcing rigidity and binary thinking around art and even content that is being, as people say, content being delivered to audiences. And I think that, I think work that is experimental needs to be nourished and nurtured because it's the first one to get axed, right? In these kinds of situations in the world, it's the first kind of work that kind of not disappears, but basically has no support for it, or very little support, I should say. And I think that that's to the detriment of the form. I also think that even on a high-end level, I just want to shout out to some peculiar things that are happening in our industry, which I think I've mentioned before on this series, but I'll bring it to the fore right now. So there's a big project, very mainstream, by the Australian artist Kip Williams that is playing on Broadway and that also played in London. It's Sarah Snook is in The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's a production that originated in Australia, and it is digital theater. It's live digital theater. That is what they're doing. And a lot of this discussion, sadly, some of it, to a great extent, still does this very peculiar thing of saying, "But is it theater?" Question mark. Which and a colleague of mine, I'm editing a handbook on digital performance right now, and my co-editor and I have been having long conversations about when did this begin? This very odd kind of thing of like looking at something that is is a theater piece, and then looking at it and saying, "But is it theater?" And I don't know if you have thoughts about this, of like why there's this persistent desire to literally look at something that's made by theater artists, and then critics and also people in our industry trying to describe it as not being theater. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but I thought you might, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think also I should shout out Ben Holbrook because he really inspired me with audio theater. He did this I think it was called Theater Immaterial, and he did it during Expo. And I remember it was like during that COVID time where you just had no connection to the world, and the piece really asked you to walk away from the computer and just listen to the sounds, and it guided you through this almost like meditative bit. And at the end, it was like you had this experience where you're all listening to the same thing, but you imagine different things. And when we had the live experience of, because Jared's audio play, it was like a packed room at Brick Ox, and people had to sit on the floor. And people, I looked inside because I couldn't even sit in there with everybody, but people were kind of closing their eyes and just listening. And afterwards, everybody was like, wow, that was really cool to like sit together and like we're all listening together, but we're all seeing different things. I I'm really into the intimacy of theater. Like I think that's why I called it Mind Dream, is I'm thinking about it as like, there's so many different ways to look at a venue. It's like this little uh screen, the Zoom screen. It's like, there's like a proscenium, and I feel like you can make theater anywhere. I I just saw the Trojans, which is this play by Loading Dock Theater. It's gotten some really wonderful reviews, as it should, and it's at the Cell on 23rd Street, and the venue's so small, and it's this big explosive play. There's like 15 people in it, and the direction is absolutely astounding. It's very like jam-packed with images, and I was thinking about it after how singular that experience is for every single seat, because it's like, where I was sitting, I was, like, looking up and a certain image would happen, and my I think what I like about theater is it's kinda like, it demands you to think about, like, so many things at once while it's happening, so even if you're all sitting together, you're not seeing the same thing ever, from any angle, and so I just think like the nature of theater is extremely intimate. It's like you're I think uh the kids are obsessed with this liminal spaces like uh the kid I don't but like liminal space. It's like you're just seeing your vision. And so I just think there's no one single way to watch a play. And so I just think trying to define theater as this very specific thing um is hurtful to the form, especially because if we think about the concept of capitalism as this thing that's always trying to innovate, um, it's like you're kind of hurting the form if you try to box it into one thing. I
Although speaking of capitalism, which of course is undercurrent of everything because we're in it,
yeah,
somebody posted the other day online, and this, I kind of resonated with this very much. But they said, I posted something about, it was sort of snarky, but it's true, which was, I think, I said, theater pretends that abstract art doesn't exist, right? Like it's sort of like abstract art happened. It happened a long time ago, and
yeah,
theater just sort of acts like abstract art. What? Well, what did you mean abstract art? And so I'm like, dude, like it's been around, and
yeah,
and so that's and then somebody replied to me and said, I know it's like weird, like people in visual art and in performance have been experimenting with digital media for many, many years.
yeah,
And
yeah,
theater pretends that hasn't happened either.
yeah,
And I'm not, and of course I'm being a little snarky, but not all theater pretends, but I think that a lot of theater does, actually. A lot of theater, the way people talk about it, it's like, what do you mean? I mean, what do you mean a screen? And I'm like, dude, like there have been screens on stage since Brecht and Piscator, like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like I think that, it's just sort of a funny a notion of purity around our form. I think this thing of like it might get contaminated if we actually think about
yeah,
our form in relationship to what's happening in visual arts and in music and in film and like other things. Theater wants to kind of gatekeep itself, I
yeah,
think, to its detriment. And then, of course, they're always talking about where's the audience. And I'm like, well, dude, if you're constantly gatekeeping yourself, there is no audience, right? Like the audience is
absolutely.
very limited, right? So it's just a very, very strange conundrum, not something that we'll solve today, but I think something I just want to bring up. Speaking of, I want to sort of dovetail now to like your own journey as a playwright. And how did you get into this? This is a strange thing to want to do with your life. So yeah, how did you get
Yeah.
into this?
Well, I just want to add really fast a little saucy point that you
Yeah,
made me is that I think it's also gatekeeping because it's so tied to physical real estate. Like I
right.
kind of had and not to come for the theaters with like amazing real estate. And I think for instance the Cell, it's like you come off of the subway on 8th Ave and it's right there, and I'm like, wow, this is what theater needs, is like that accessibility. But at the same time, I guess I understand why people need to like feel like, no, it's very specific to here, it has to be this way. I think they're kind of protecting something even beyond the form.
Right.
But anyway, um yeah, my playwriting journey is really bizarre. I think I always say it has to do with growing up online. I had a lot of my formative relationships in chat rooms on IRC, and I think we would do a lot of imagining. And you got this like dialogue box, and you're making up like silly little worlds. So I think like I the words kind of were mainlined into my brain, and then I was like, well, this would be cool to see like in reality. And so I would write and direct my own little one acts in high school. And then I this is my own kind of inexperience showing, but I went to the new school, and I think I just didn't understand uh how to get involved, and I didn't have a lot of guidance. And then I had a lot of family tragedies happening at that time that kind of and also it was like the 2008 recession, so I think I was like very compelled to go to work and to be like, okay, theater is unnecessary, and I need to like focus on getting a job and making money and supporting myself. And then I had a bit of a like a quarter life crisis where I was just very depressed. And so I was like, what's missing here? And so I realized I didn't really give theater a chance, and I went back to grad school. I went to this really cool low residency school in Minneapolis called Augsburg. And
What? Didn't
yeah,
know that. Oh, wow.
yeah. I applied to like some of the big ones and I didn't get in, and I, rightfully so, because I didn't really have the experience, but I think it was the best thing for me because I had some great mentors there, Carson Kreitzer, Sarah Myers, Andrew Rosendorf, and Harrison David Rivers. And Harrison introduced me to Teresa at the Brick, and I think I got knowledge from going to the Brick and just seeing theater that wasn't just because I'd see things at like Playwrights Horizons and Signature, and that stuff was great, but I also sometimes felt like I didn't see myself in it, and I just saw like the more adventurous stuff at the Brick, and then from there I think I started meeting my creative partners, and from there we've been inspiring each other. So it's been a weird journey.
Yeah, totally. How did I want to focus a little bit on this play that you're on commission with at the Ensemble Studio Theater, and it's a play about Aaron Schwartz, and we've supported it a little bit through the Lortel. Anything I can do to help support Allyson, yay! But I wonder how. I mean, I feel like that piece sort of incorporates a lot of your concerns, both politically as well as around how the internet and how it's indeed gatekept by rentier capitalists. And so I just wonder if you wanted to speak about that play a little bit. I know it's still in process, but if there's something you want to say about its existence or at least its development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you so much to Alcove for the support, because that truly means a lot. And I do have a bit of a rough first draft, but I'm so slow about it because I'm so detail oriented, and I think I want to give it another pass. But basically, for those who don't know Aaron Schwartz, he's an interesting. I guess it's weird to call him a figure because he was also just like a real person with his own uh hopes and dreams and desires. But I first heard about him maybe 10 years ago, and I watched a documentary called The Internet's Own Boy, and it it like hit me for a month. Like I was like just emotionally drained from watching it, and I realized I identified with him so much because he was born in 1986, and he kind of came of age with the internet. The World Wide Web became public to us around 1992, 93. He had access to it a little bit before, and he was known as a bit of a programming prodigy. So he got involved in some really cool things as a young boy, the development of RSS, and this thing called Creative Commons. So even as like a young boy, he was thinking about copyright law and things like information online. And so he kind of got catapulted through this industry. He went to Stanford for a bit and then got involved in the founding of Reddit. He helped code it at the very first Y Combinator, which is now famously known as this like it's like the birthplace of a lot of tech. And he was like in the first class there. And you know, I sometimes call him like the anti-tech lord. It's, he got all this money from Reddit, and then he rejected all of that. He didn't like that Silicon Valley life that I think is very much like put on a pedestal. Like this is the American dream. He got more involved in he became more curious about politics and activism. Uh, and what he tragically is known for is that he was very into information as like free access. He was very interested in how JSTOR was kept behind a paywall, especially because a lot of medical research is taxpayer funded. These are all like the breadth of human knowledge. Things from 100 years ago should be free, free for anyone to access. What if someone in Africa or Europe or South America wants, they have the potential in them to cure a disease and they can't access this information? Why is it behind a paywall? The internet is literally like an infinite printing press. Things should just be accessible. And so he downloaded, I think about half a JSTOR off of a laptop at MIT, which he had access to as a fellow at Harvard. And he was caught. There was a lot of complications in that. For instance, the laptop was found and then kept there. Um, instead of stopping him, they wanted to kind of catch him, and the feds got involved. At the time, it was like a little bit post 9/11, so there was a lot of throwing the book at people. This era of Chelsea Manning and Ed Snowden, I think it was just about making examples of people. And so it very complicated. I could get into all that, but it would take a while. He took his own life in 2013. But I'm just very interested in how his life kind of mirrors the arc of the internet, and how it was this new thing and then it got locked in. I think a lot of us today realize how different the internet is in a way that's not pleasant, and what it could be. And so I just think the things he talked about are still not really talked about, and I think what he went through is indicative of something people need to be told. So I want to theatrically explore that. It's very complicated, so I might skip over things, and I apologize, but I'm also happy to go over anything, or we
Yeah,
can,
yeah, no,
you
it's great. It's great to sort of hear a little bit about where you, first of all, what ignited your interest in his story, and also this convergence of, which is true, which I sort of had forgotten that in a way he was part of the early day, he was part of the beginning of the internet as we know it now, right? So of course it's changed so much, and I think that this question that still is talked about now, which is about what happens to intellectual labor and access to knowledge, and who owns knowledge, and
yeah,
should we be sharing knowledge with one another?
absolutely.
And I think that's so I read, I won't say who wrote it, but I read something today which was slightly controversial, I think, but pretty famous tech person who said we should abandon IP law, and it was sort of a little bit like an affront, and at the same time, underneath it, weirdly, I think there is something around it. I think it dovetails a little bit with questions around ownership and thinking of intellectual work as property, which it is, but also and how it's compensated for, but also how that aligns with, weirdly, with the notion of capitalist property, right? So that you're suddenly making something that is a commodity that needs to be sold, and then needs to be bought, and then it's in a chain of that kind of chain of different commodities, and you know what if somebody can't afford that commodity, right? So I think
Yeah.
that this question always around IP, and also around what does property mean to a maker, to an artist, to a scholar, scholarship especially. It's like, I have questions around myself around so much work that is indeed is not accessible to people, and like kind of amazing stuff, and you're like, oh, why is this hidden? Why is this like you can only access it if you have a library subscription through an university, and so forth. And so these are all questions that I think are rich and provocative, and stuff that is part of our lives. Sometimes we don't think about it as consciously, but they're definitely part of our lives. And Aaron was sort of in the middle of all of that, in a way, of that
Yeah.
conversation.
He was
Um,
speaking to it. And one thing that's interesting is that a lot of that stuff used to make sense as a commodity because people had to take the risk of printing books, and
right.
that we don't need to print the books. So, it, just paying for access, which is very bizarre. And I think it ties into climate change in that information is power.
Right.
And I think the internet, as we're starting to see, is almost like purposely kept anti-intellectual. Yeah, so it's like information is power, but if it's obfuscated and hard to access, it's
Right.
and upsetting.
Yeah, and then you have to sort of find it through like small groups of people that are actually trying to have deep, thoughtful conversations
Yeah.
online, which I really appreciate. A slight sidebar, but I was bemoaning, I think, a little bit the speaking of theater, bemoaning the I wouldn't say demise. That feels a little bit too intense a word to use, but I think partly the lack of, shall we say, long form theater criticism that online had a kind of burst in the early aughts. There was this tons of theater blogs, tons of people writing deep, 6,000 words, 5,000 words, on a subject and really going deep on it and like looking at plays, in a kind of very thoughtful way and performances and productions and historically and blah, blah, blah. And there was so much energy around this sort of theater blogging culture that then mid-aughts kind of dissipated, partly because people were doing free labor, but
Yeah.
I think that also around that was that conversation didn't translate. I think there was this illusion, maybe, this is me projecting onto this phenomenon, but this illusion that maybe a mainstream, in quotation marks, press would suddenly accommodate long-form theater criticism, performance criticism in a serious way. And it didn't, right?
Yeah.
Things get shorter and shorter and shorter. It's the bullet point. It's like a capsule review. Things get kind of dumbed down. And I think that, and again, even down to like what's happening a lot with I laugh and I also cry every time I see it. But I open a document and I have like an AI thing come up on my thing, and it says, "Oh, this is such a long document. Can I just give you a summary of what it is?" And I'm like, "No, I actually want to read the thing." Like, I don't want to rely on the summary. I actually want to have the experience of reading it and discovering something while I'm reading it and not while you give me a summary of it. But I think that's sort of what's happened with reviewing, and partly because there's less outlets, there's less support for arts criticism, et cetera. Again, in theater, visual arts, I think, is a little bit different, and film as well. But so I think that there was something lost around this notion, because I remember the early aughts, this kind of like excitement around like, oh my gosh, what is so-and-so going to write about? And then they're going to say this, and then that person's going to say that, and they're going to answer them, and then blah, 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 blah. And I think there's less of that now around theater, and you have a few isolated spaces where that still happens, but it's few and far between. And I think that it's also a kind of loss to the community, in the sense that searching for, I'm a big believer in arts criticism and as a field, and I think that it's so necessary to what we do, and I think it often gets derided because it's put under a consumerist kind of groupthink, but actually thoughtful arts criticism actually teaches you something about the art form. And I want to go back to this idea of access, because when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey and Miami and different states, I couldn't see stuff. Like, so I relied on, like, I was interested in theater, but I was like, oh, where do I see it? And I was reading arts criticism. I was like, getting copies of like New York Magazine or the New Yorker or whatever at my local library. And I was like reading critics talking about shows. And I was going, oh, that's what this is. And they were talking thoughtfully about it. And I was like, wow, this is so cool, right? And I think that for me, that was a gateway, just like it was seeing stuff on, PBS or like other platforms that actually beam performances into my room, right? Like, and I thought, oh, that's what that looks like, right? And so I think that this notion of like, and that was all knowledge, right? That was all like, how do I access this knowledge? How do I understand? There's something about theater, again, going back to this notion of like FOMO, right? Like you have to be in the room to experience it or have to know about it. And I was like, well, actually, how do you invite people into our artistry? And the one way to invite them into our artistry is through different ways of accessing our artistry, whether it be through somebody writing about it, whether it be through like having it simulcast into our room, whether through making work digitally that's digitally native, etc. And podcast, Audible, right? Like things that are audio drama, things that are not just Audible, but many others. one of the first things that I remember listening to was like BBC radio drama or whatever. And I was like, oh, you could have a play on the radio? Like, I didn't know you could do that, right? Like, I just think there's so many different ways of interacting with our form. So long ways to say that I think there's something in here about how we engage with, as both theater makers, practitioners, viewers, but also like when we're distanced, when we're like miles and miles away from something, how do we interact with the art form that is important to us, and also the industry, which is very big and global, and interact with that, So I don't know if you have thoughts around any of this. You might have. I have a feeling.
Definitely. I mean, like, I think some of the theater, some of the theater writing today can be hit or miss. I think sometimes people don't know, and sometimes I think theater makers are best equipped to write about theater because it's like you understand how piecemeal it is and how sometimes things are not just like one big vision. So someone who might not be like in the system of theater might not understand that, you might not like this element. Like you can objectively look at it, like I can see a play and say, okay, I didn't like the writing, but I loved the lighting. I loved the production. I'm curious what you think about social media based sites. I'm like a pretty avid user of Letterboxd. Um, I get kind of annoyed at it because I think sometimes people try to do like these little one-liners that they think are, and those are great, but I really sometimes I'll like watch a movie and I just really want to read like how someone saw it. And then there's show score, which a lot of people make fun of it, and yeah, sometimes people don't know what the heck they're saying, but then other times they do. And so I don't know if it hurts or helps, but I think like the lack of like actual outlets for thoughtful discussion really stinks. I'm curious about, these sites where it's like social media that involves some kind of gamification of seeing the thing, and if that's like hurting or helping. Uh, I don't know if I have any bigger thoughts on it, but I'm curious what you think of show score.
Yeah, show score I think is fascinating because I remember when it started, and it was just a way. I mean, for one thing, it was a way to get inexpensive ticket. I was like, great, I can see something for X and then write a like thoughtful something about it. I'm happy to do that, support the work, etc. It's evolved us slightly into something else, but I find it useful in the sense that it does feel just as, I won't name the artist, but there was an artist that we were talking about. They had a show on and they were just reading all the stuff on Reddit about the show that people were writing. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, yeah, you're reading the review, the quote, the proper reviews or whatever, but actually he was really interested in like seeing what the people on Reddit were talking about the play. And I was like, oh, cool. So, and I look at show score that way. I'm like, oh, what are people that went to the thing? What are they experiencing? What are they thinking about? Like sometimes, sometimes it's like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it's like they go into these long, kind of involved things. And I'm like, that's so cool. Like you actually care enough about the form that you're willing to write that. And I find it sometimes, to be, it feels a little bit like it's just a pocket of audience viewership that went to see something. But I'd rather have that than no conversation around the work,
Sometimes
because I think, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to say sometimes I'll look at, because I know I'm not going to go something because I can't afford it, but it's good to get the pulse on it,
Yeah.
like those meetings.
Yeah, totally. And it's also, sometimes it's just like super honest reactions to something. They're like, they'll be like, I don't know what this was. I don't get it. And you're like, okay, that's you're an audience member. You had a reaction. You had an experience. Like, that's what you feel. Like, I think that, I'm going to mention a little bit, we're almost at time, but I also want to mention that sometimes I think there's something in theater that is policing or the audience behavior. that's policing kind of like how people, how they think, what they should think, what they should be thinking, how they should behave, and I'm just like, audiences are audiences. They're all different individually. They all come to the work. One of the things I love about digital work is actually the audience has a lot of agency in digital work. And I think that sometimes I think IRL theater feels threatened by that, right? This is my theory. My theory is IRL theaters are like, what do you mean the audience has agency to like get up, move around, go to the loo, come back, see the thing, do whatever they want, wear their PJs, not wear their PJs, whatever they want to do. I'm like, yeah, isn't that awesome? It's kind of awesome that the audience has agency, and also at a time when we have such a deeply entrenched, kind of ableism. That's definitely part of capitalism that doesn't understand, right? We have a huge, totally preventable, but we have it anyway. Sadly, millions of people have long COVID, right? Which is a variety of, it's a constellation of like vascular and neurotropic, sort of symptoms and sometimes chronic disease, right? So, and a lot of it, some of it has to do with, not all of it, but some of it has to do with chronic fatigue. Those are audience members, and sometimes they need to lie down to see the show.
Yeah.
And you can do that online, right? And that becomes accessible. Right. And I think that that is something that I think our industry needs to be talking about, and don't talk about enough. So I don't know. I'll throw that out there to you.
This is something I'm super passionate about that I didn't bring up yet, because this has been a big thing for me since the digital and audio stuff has come up in my life. Is it really opened my eyes to, there's people who can't ever afford to live in New York City. I think, as much as we like to act like there's theater around the world and anyone can see it, there's only certain kinds of theater in New York or in London or Berlin. And it's like, you're not gonna see like weird experimental stuff the same way. Or even like, the public doing Carol Churchill. It's like uh you're probably not gonna see that in like Alaska. I mean, I hope you do, but I just think like, and there's a number of reasons why accessibility is important. It's like cost, access to that kind of culture. It's like a whole other audience. Disability, which is a huge one for me. I've had a lot of people only see my work as people with, MS or cancer or things like that. And, they were never going to go physically to the theater. Um, and yeah, I think also in terms of accessibility, just like cost of entry into theater, right? Like, uh, you you have to be in New York to make the theater. Um, I mean, I'm in New Jersey and I've made it work, but everyone's always like, you have to be here, you have to do XYZ. And that makes it really hard for a lot of people. Someone should be able to make art in I don't know, I'm trying to think, the middle of
Kansas.
yeah,
Kansas. Can I say Kansas?
yeah, or the wilderness of Canada or something. It's like you're allowed to make that art. And I just think that's another form of breaking down a gate that is really exciting to me. It's just more affordable because you're already not paying for rent in New York City. But then yeah, I'm very it just introduces larger audiences, especially folks who are disabled.
Yeah, and historically, uh, to this day, which I think is rather shameful, a lot of theaters are not accessible spaces,
Yeah,
and both for performers as well as for audiences,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
a huge, you know, uh, problem, and something that I think doesn't get addressed often or is treated like a niche conversation. It's not a niche conversation. It's actually like, is it for everyone or is it not? Period.
Yeah.
You know,
It's not niche. I mean, I really enjoy digital art. I'm glad Expo still does digital work every year. I know Here Arts has
right?
uh it's really cool that some theaters are still doing it. And I think I also think of it as just access, in that people don't have the money or time. I think we don't think about time as an access problem.
It is.
Yeah. It's very
It is.
limited.
and people have different relationships to time. I often talk about like people who are caregiving or, who are, running their household and don't have like copious amounts of hours in their day. Maybe are taking 2 or 3 jobs, but maybe they, like this art form, right? And suddenly it becomes, well, I can only see it at 8 o'clock or at 7 o'clock if I go there. And it's like, but actually my life doesn't accommodate that, right? So I think there's something about this. That's why I'm a big believer in both live stuff online, but also on-demand stuff online, because on-demand actually frees you up in that way. It's like, oh, I can see it when I actually have time to see it. Thank you for archiving it, or whatever you're doing a performance capture, or however it's being manifested, or seeing it later if it went live earlier in the day. I think that that's one way. And we also experience, all different art forms this way, right? Like people are watching, repeat clips of Coachella, for example, right? Like performances of Coachella, like ad infinitum. And I'm like, well, that was a live performance.
Yeah.
But now we're watching it on demand, in a different way. But people are just as excited about it and want to re-see it. And I'll do we're almost at time, but I have to mention this because it made me laugh. But there was a review of a show that shall not be named. But the reviewer in the write-up said that after they saw the show live in person, went home, and the show happened to also be on demand. And so that they said they went to, and then they came home and watched it on demand because they needed captioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, there you go. There Absolutely. You go. That is also an accessibility issue. They were in a live experience. They were watching the thing. They came home. That show happened. Just so happens, by magic, also happened to be on demand. And they needed the captions. And they were like, I need to see it again because I need to see the captions. I missed half of it, or I couldn't understand, there were parts I couldn't understand, like whatever, whatever, like no excuses, but it's just like they needed the captions and they were not being offered by the venue. Yeah. And so that is another thing around that we have to think about in terms of accessibility. We're almost at time, but I wanted to see what's inspiring you these days. What are you reading, watching, listening to, dreaming about? Yeah.
Yeah, there's always an abundance of things and overwhelming. I mean, I am always inspired by the community surrounding the Brick. I just went to the New Works night on Friday and I saw some really wonderful stuff. And I saw the Trojans on Saturday, which is the loading dock at the cell. I mentioned it already, but that's because I've been thinking about it a lot. It's basically my favorite kind of theater that's just very like, and I think this kind of plays into climate change because if I wanted to make a point earlier about AI that I didn't make, and that tying into climate change, because it's like I don't think a computer could write something like this, but it's, these workers in an Amazon warehouse who decide to reenact like the myths of their hometown. And so they all get really involved in recreating this like synthwave 80s rom-com movie. And it becomes just this over the top myth telling story that replicates the Iliad. And it just, these beautiful homemade costumes, incredible sound design, incredible lighting. It just had like every little detail that makes theater what it is. I do think it would be incredible film, so who knows, hopefully they would do that. But that was incredible. And I've been really inspired by Leonard Cohen. I listen to him a lot. I love his poetry. And then the other thing inspiring me lately is I read a lot of I like to call them brain rot books, but reading a lot of books about US empire. There's this book called The Devil's Chessboard I read that really shook me up, and I'm reading this one right now called Family of Secrets that's about the Bush Empire. So I find that stuff powerful, like, reading about how things work so that I understand it better. Um, but it also makes me angry. So
yeah, I hear you. Well, reading about systems, right? And I think there's something about the US that, I've said it before on this series, but I'll say it again. That I think the US has a very peculiar, I think, relationship to kind of cultural amnesia historically. And like I was talking to someone online yesterday, and I was like, remember George W. Bush? Do you know what I mean? They were talking about, this is all new, empire. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, literally, we just saw it happen. I mean, you know, and if you don't remember, read about it, right? Like if you weren't there at the time, read about it. This is not things that happen in the systems that we're in, have been happening, right? And I think that sometimes there's a kind of like a blinkered kind of like surprise. This has never happened before. Like, well, study your history and find out that actually we're in a pattern, right, of these things occurring. And sometimes they're talked about and sometimes they're erased in quotation marks. Sometimes the information is buried, talking about access and information, right? What information gets buried, which story gets told, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And I think that as artists, I will say that one of our jobs is to actually move those stories forward. Yes, Allyson, you were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just agreeing, and it ties into the Aaron play, because I think that was a big thing for him. Is you know, we think of access to information as like JSTOR books, but it's also like the truth, right? Like knowledge, just being told the plain truth that's not obfuscated, so that we can learn from history. Uh, you know, I came of age during the Iraq War and GW, and so I remember this feeling of anger and everyone being like, never again. So the cycle was so short, and it does make my brain spin. But I agree, as theater writers, it's about kind of rooting through that stuff. And I almost see theater writing as journalism, like a very creative journalism. I like to be inspired by real world events. So I don't know what's going to come of reading these books, but they definitely make me like want to write when I read them.
So can't wait. For those of you, we're almost at time. We're at time. Thank you so much, Allyson, for being our guest today. For those of you out there, follow Allyson Dwyer's work wherever it exists. You know, some of it is at the Brick, on the Exponential Festival, on YouTube, also their company, and you know, just keep their name in your radar, as it were. As always, if you do know this series, I hit end recording and say so long, but I also stay online afterwards with our guests to say a little more formal offline goodbye. But for now, thanks for watching or listening to, however you're engaging with this, Conversations from the Alcove. Check us back and see who else is our guest next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.